I'm Sarah Brumfield,
I'm Ben. Together we run From the Page.
and today we're going to talk about what we've learned from over a decade of running crowdsourcing projects. When we get done, we'll send out a recording and any of the resources that we mention in this talk. So that will go out probably tomorrow, but maybe the next day. I'm going to go to the next slide. So we're going to talk about kind of what is From the Page, which is our crowdsourcing platform. We think a lot of what we talk about today, though, applies to lots of different types of crowdsourcing tasks and projects. So there's a lot to take away, even if you don't use From the Page. What's effective crowdsourcing? Thinking about volunteers, which are the heart of crowdsourcing, selecting your material, developing your instructions, kicking off your project, keeping your volunteers engaged. And then we're happy to take Q&A at the end, and then we'll probably transition to a demo of From the Page.
Okay, so let's get going. Hopefully, if we get more participants, we'll see the warning. Okay. So as Sarah mentioned, we run From the Page. So there are a lot of different crowdsourcing platforms out there. There's a lot of different crowdsourcing tasks that exist. What we tend to focus on is crowdsourcing around archival documents. So textual records, right? We're talking about historic diaries or letters or census records or things like that. We do think, though, that a lot of these lessons also apply to, say, georectifying maps or photo identification. So we try to kind of zoom out and take a broad picture here as much as possible. So our platform briefly lets people see an image of a page and transcribe the text from the page. We try to keep the technology as simple as possible for users because honestly, transcribing text is a complex task already, right? It's hard enough. So we have seen a lot of successful projects over the last 9 years.
Yeah.
Yes. So here's a handful of the institutions that we've partnered with. So let's talk about effective crowdsourcing. So effective crowdsourcing is, in our opinion, a collaboration between an institution and the public. The goal being deep public engagement with special collections and archives. So a lot of organizations have social media presences, Instagram accounts, things like that. That's wonderful. But one of the challenges with that engagement is that it's really broad, but not very deep, right? Oftentimes the only way that people can engage with the material is by clicking a like button or reposting or maybe adding a comment, right? It's good for reach, but it doesn't allow members of the public to share their own passion about the subject. Or their knowledge about the material back with you or your institution, the institution sharing the content. So in addition to being about deep engagement, crowdsourcing in our context is about improving metadata for digitized assets in ways that require massive amounts of human interpretation. That doesn't mean massive numbers of humans or massive numbers of items. It could just mean one person who's really passionate, who's willing to spend a lot of time transcribing a single set of letters or a single diary. But that's the kind of thing that archival staff usually aren't able to commit their resources to. Organizations aren't able to commit their priorities to that kind of work, right? If there's boxes and boxes of unprocessed material, you really can't have a staff member spend weeks working on a single diary.
Yeah. So this example on the page actually doesn't have a lot of text. It's an orchidologist notebook from the Chicago Botanic Garden. But when we talk about massive amounts of human interpretation, this is a really good example because in order to effectively transcribe this, let's see. So it's useful if you know about orchids. You need to know some Latin because all of the orchids are described using their Latin names. And oh yes, the notebook is also in German. So just think about the levels of human interpretation that are going on to get, a line or two of text per page.
But you can find the right person, and in this
Yes,
case,
they did.
yeah, they did. So speaking of archival staff, effective crowdsourcing is really only possible with the guidance and engagement of staff, right? You can't replace knowledge professionals with the crowd, right? It just doesn't work.
So we put a picture of a puppy here because our running joke is that crowdsourcing is free as in puppy, rather than free as in speech or free as in beer. The puppy is free, but you have to take care of it and you have to do some work. The volunteers that participate in these projects don't like being ignored. They don't like having their work lost. They're doing something that they feel is meaningful and they're engaging with you and your institution. Therefore, you need to make sure that their work is meaningful and engage with them.
Yeah, we have a colleague who jokes that if someone thinks that crowdsourcing is about getting volunteers to do their homework for them, they're going to very quickly find that actually they've got a brand new homework assignment that's totally different.
So let's start with volunteers. If you don't have volunteers, you're not going to have a successful crowdsourcing project. I used to have just one slide on this, but I now have 4 because volunteers are so important to crowdsourcing projects. So this is a snapshot of a week on FromThePage. This was right after we had hit our 2 millionth page transcribed. And over that week, we had 450 volunteers working on the platform. When we look across a year, we have about 5,000 volunteers. And we want that magic to happen for you to post your material on FromThePage and for one of these volunteers to find it and to start working on it. You know, we work very hard to make that happen for you. We look for ways to give volunteers ways to find projects they're interested in. We highlight brand new projects, both in our landing page and in our newsletters to active volunteers. But it isn't always easy to find those volunteers. So we also suggest that you work to recruit volunteers because your most dedicated volunteers are often the ones that have ties to your location. That might mean they're part of the local genealogy society or historical society. But sometimes what it means is they're the expats who've left and miss home. Or your volunteers have ties to your material, right? They're interested in the particular subject matter that your material covers. So there's lots of different ways to find volunteers. This is a picture of some of the Library of Virginia's volunteers at their annual Transcribiversary. I know. Library of Virginia has this really amazing crowdsourcing program, and this is just kind of one element of it. But what I love about this picture is it really shows how diverse their volunteers are. We know that volunteers tend to skew older. Retirees love these projects because it brings meaningful volunteer work that they can do from home. But LVA has a lot of students that work with them as well. So you need to start by thinking, where can we find volunteers? Who will they be? Do you already have volunteers that are engaged with your institutions, who work with your institutions? Do you have people who are local who are interested? Those are questions that you start asking to think about where you can find volunteers. Maybe you're deep in a particular subject matter and you can reach out to communities around that subject matter. One of our very early projects was with the Yaquina Head Lighthouses in Oregon. They had lighthouse keepers logs over decades, and they were able to engage with lighthouse fans. It turns out there are people who are really enthusiastic about lighthouses, and they had those people come in virtually and work on transcribing. When you think about volunteers, you can also think about what material has been the most popular with your patrons and think about why it's popular. So this image is a volunteer with the Missouri State Archives holding her grandfather's death certificate. Genealogists love projects with lots of names and vital information, even if the material is not as engaging as diaries or letters. We've seen some very successful projects partner with heritage organizations, especially the Daughters of the American Revolution. The last thing to realize is you may not be familiar with crowdsourcing, but it may not be something that your volunteers are familiar with either. It's a bit intimidating, right? So if you think through how you can make it easier for them, how to get them over that discomfort, that puts you in a good mindset for working with your volunteers. And what we see is that volunteers and transcribers get really into this type of work. It's very fun, it's very engaging. The image on the screen represents the most active transcribers on 3 different projects. So people who did at least 10 pages worth of work for the Indiana Archives, the Library of Virginia, and the California State Library. What you see here is that while the bulk of their active transcribers were independent, right, did their own thing for their own institutions, there were overlaps. There are volunteers who go from project to project. In this particular case, all three of these projects were World War I related projects. So you have that kind of subject matter enthusiasm or passion. We have one volunteer who maybe once a month will scroll through our list of projects looking for something she hasn't worked on and go hop in and try something new. It's kind of fascinating because sometimes she finds something she's really interested in and goes deep and contributes a lot. And sometimes she does a page or two and moves on.
So how do you figure out what material is appropriate for a crowdsourcing project? Volunteers are motivated by a number of things. Not every volunteer is motivated by the same thing. So we recommend that you choose material that can tell a good story, provide an immersive experience, or that contains local history or genealogy. So one thing to look for is material that can tell good stories, right? If you get started reading in a diary, you want to turn the page, you want to find out what happens next. There's this kind of intrinsic motivation from the narrative, right? Volunteers build a connection with the people in the story. As you can see in this email that I received from a diary transcription project that I run, in which the person who's transcribing gets very impatient and says, I'm somebody in this diarist's household is sick. What is wrong with her, right? What's going to happen? And sadly, we had to inform her that Josie would
dies.
die in about 3 months. But that kind of connection to the material and that motivation of the narrative is really important. So letters and diaries can provide an immersive experience to the people transcribing them, but non-narrative material can do the same thing, right? So when the Alabama State Archives indexed their World War I service cards collection, the collections were organized by county. So the volunteers were given a snapshot of a community, right? They're working through a collection, 500 cards that are, Coffee County, Alabama, surnames G through M, right? That's kind of how things are organized. And the person doing that sees a snapshot of Coffee County, Alabama in 1918, right? And they see the place names, they see the service members' names, right? They may spot familiar places, familiar surnames, families that they recognize, right? That's very immersive, even though it's not narrative. You can also be successful with material that has a lot of local history. The Indianapolis Public Library ran a project transcribing records from Indianapolis public schools. These are pretty dry records, right? List of students' names and their parents. But it's a genealogist's goldmine, and genealogists who have benefited from those kinds of projects in the past, those kinds of databases, they understand that and they're motivated to bring more of that online.
We also find that if you can give your volunteers a sense of accomplishment, that's very motivating. I think we all are motivated by checking things off the list. So those World War I service cards, those were a really successful project. I think part of it was you had a single card, you had single cards, and they only collected about 5 fields from each card. So a transcriber could really get a lot done. We all like getting stuff done. That feeling of accomplishment kept them coming back. That project was 111,000 service cards, and they transcribed them in 2.5 months. And I think it's because their material hit so many of these points. They had great relationships with their local genealogy and history organizations. You had a feeling of accomplishment. The material was immersive. And frankly, it was also typewritten in many cases, which does make it a lot easier.
So once you've identified material, the next thing to do is to define the task to be done. So defining tasks also means giving people instructions. For transcription projects, that means giving people instructions on how to transcribe. The minute anyone encounters a word that's unclear to read, or they had an abbreviation or a spelling that's non-standard, they're going to have questions, right? We encourage projects to develop transcription conventions that give instructions to volunteers what to do when they hit those things. And we actually will show this on the transcription screen itself. So it's right underneath the field that volunteers are typing into, so they can find it if they run into projects. This particular example is from the Wisconsin Historical Society. They have amazing documentation for some of their government records. They even have images saying, where on this particular index card to look for the fields we're asking you to transcribe. one of the things that we recommend is that you transcribe a couple of example pages and upload them as a separate section. That is useful for two reasons. One is that provides an alternative form of documentation, right? Some people don't read instructions, but they like looking at examples. The other thing that that's really useful for is that the act of transcribing the material, the act of trying to perform the task that you were asking volunteers to do, is a great way to develop your instructions, right? You're doing this yourself, you're encountering strange things that maybe you weren't aware were in the material you have digitized. Well, you can add those instructions as you go along. After you do that, we recommend grabbing somebody else in your organization, ideally somebody who doesn't work with historic documents, and asking them to do this task, right? Watch them try to transcribe a page and make notes of the questions that they ask you. Right? That's a great opportunity to update your conventions and update your examples. So bringing people together to develop your conventions is really useful for documentation, but they're also a great way to start a project. You can do outreach with them via transcribathons. So Library of Virginia does 2 transcribathons a month.
They're an exception.
Right, you don't have to do that, but you can launch a transcribathon at the very beginning of a project and bring in people who you think might be leaders within their field or their communities, people who are active in genealogy organizations or local history organizations, but people within your community. Doing an in-person transcribathon is really useful because it gives you the opportunity to do hands-on instructions, get people over the hump and discomfort of what am I doing here? Is what I'm doing good enough? You know, I have trouble reading cursive. How does this work? I've never dealt with these legal documents, all those kinds of things. You can get them over that hump as you work through this together, and then they can take that enthusiasm, that expertise, and that confidence back to their own communities and enlist other people and encourage them to join in. Transcribathons are also an event that local media often likes to highlight. So I think this is a couple of interesting examples because the French department at Tulane is promoting an event, a transcribathon, at the New Orleans Jazz Museum. Well, they're not the same organization at all, right? The New Orleans Jazz Museum launched this project working with colonial French handwriting, and the French department at Tulane says, hey, people who are interested in working on their French in New Orleans, you should check this out. On the right-hand side, you can see an example of an actual participant in one of these transcribathons posting about it online, saying, check out how cool this is. I'm working with early Old English manuscripts, right? This is really neat.
So there's also virtual
transcribathons. You can do virtual transcribathons.
Yes.
That's also possible. The communication barrier may be a lot higher, but a video conference kickoff to walk volunteers through a project can work. If you try to do a full, all hands on deck, let's all transcribe this. One of the things that we understand is effective is if you have more than one host so that people can dive into breakout rooms to work through their individual projects while somebody else is leading the overall effort.
But this is kind of a fun thing to do if you're doing like a virtual event. A lot of times virtual events are people talking at the audience, right? And this kind of turns that, and it makes the audience, interact with each other and actually participate as opposed to just receive, which I think is kind of neat. We saw a lot of this during COVID, but we've seen a number of similar things since then, or we've seen events where you'll have small groups at different locations, but they come together over Zoom to work on the same thing. So it's kind of a hybrid model as well. So lots of different options. So you don't have to have a transcribathon when you kick off your project. It's just one way to reach people. But you should definitely do some outreach and some marketing. If you have existing outreach venues, mailing lists, social media accounts, you should definitely use those to mention and promote your project. What we have actually found, there's some academic research on what was the most effective way to promote a crowdsourcing project. And what that paper, where was it?
It was a University of Uppsala working with the Swedish National Archives.
What they found was that existing email lists was actually the best way to engage volunteers.
And this is after, promotion on traditional media like radio and television and some things in newspapers. their best volunteers actually came from their existing mailing list.
Right, people you have relationships with who trust you, who are engaged at a really deep level
Right.
already with your institution. If you have a physical location, you can do handouts like at a checkout desk or as you walk out of a door. You can also look online for subject matter enthusiast communities, people who would be interested in your material and might not be local. You can find Facebook groups or X accounts. Sometimes there's even like magazines. So I have a whole post that will provide in the follow-up email about how to find organizations that might be interested in a particular subject.
And another point that I'd like to point out is that maybe you don't have a mailing list. Well, you do have people who have contacted you with research inquiries. And we have seen volunteers just really go deep when they've asked for material or asked questions about material and are pointed to an opportunity to engage that material more deeply.
We've also seen local news channels, both print and television, pick up these projects because they're interesting. They're visual, cool documents. You have people they can come in and take pictures of, and they're feel-good stories. They're a way for the local community to contribute to your mission of preserving memories. So this screenshot here is coverage by a local TV station of a project run by the Seattle Municipal Archives, and you see the actual archives behind Jeannie. You get the picture, you get the archivist. It's just, it's good television. We also saw a lot of coverage okay, so this was a project by the North Carolina State Archives when they launched their Colonial Court Records project. It was in like December, and they had coverage in 2 large newspapers. The coverage was around the holidays. It was clear to me that they had written these articles and had lined them up so they could publish them while they were all on vacation. And on slow news days as well, right? But it brought in a lot of interested volunteers. Those days were the highest number of visits to From the Page's website that year, so a lot. Once you kick off a project and you're starting to get volunteers working on it, you need to think about how to keep them engaged. It's not unusual for volunteers to drop by, transcribe a page, and you may never see them again. So we have a couple of suggestions for keeping volunteers engaged, because the more you can keep, the more you'll accomplish. So our first suggestion is that you welcome new users. So we send out a note every night to every project owner telling them what's gone on in their collections in the previous day. You'll get something like the screenshot at the bottom that shows you the name of someone who's joined your particular project. You can go to the collaborator tab on your project and see people who joined. You can grab their email addresses if they've opted in and send them an email. A stock email is fine. And you tell them what the project is, the purpose. Volunteers really like to understand the purpose of a project, what the transcribed material is going to be used for. If you have any training materials, you can link to that or your help tab and From the Page, and include how to contact you. You want them to be able to ask you questions or to share something cool they found, or see if they can bring in a group of 20 volunteers to help you transcribe. And you want to make it easy for them to be able to find you. In addition to welcoming new users, that nightly email will also include comments and questions from your collaborators, from the volunteers who are transcribing for you.
Yeah, so we've got an example here on the right, this comments from your collaborators. This is on a project that I run. You can see an example of the kinds of comments that were left on one particular project. These are really interesting to me because they're not necessarily questions, other than, the I can't read the word and entry of the 24th, messing or miping, maybe a double S, right? But there are also places that the volunteer in this case is sharing their expertise and their own research, saying, here's who this person is, here's what they did, here's what I've learned about them. That's really cool, right? And it's also really nice to have a place for that expertise to go. So
if not, it shows up in the transcription.
Right,
so
it might
that's
show
not
up
what
in
we want.
transcription or in an email to you or something like that. So we prefer to kind of focus that conversation around the transcription task, around the page where these things are happening. And you see on the left-hand side an example from, again, the Lighthouse transcription project that Sarah was talking about, where a volunteer has said there's a lot of activity around a hack. They clean it, they paint it, they varnish it. What is this work, right? And so the very next day, the people running the account, the Friends organization, responded. And they responded saying, we have no idea, right? Well, that's actually a best practice, right? That is a wonderful thing to do because it lets this volunteer know somebody is on the other end of the line, right? There is a person there paying attention. You've asked a question, you're doing your best. They're doing their best too. Maybe they don't have all the answers, but they are trying. And happily, 2 days later, the Friends organization running the project did some more research, looked up hack boat, and discovered that it's a general purpose boat, something that would totally be useful to have if you were a lighthouse keeper, and responded again. And that response also lands in Olivia's email box. So, they're able to correspond with each other online
Within the context
within
of the
the,
page, which
yes.
is one of the things that we think is important, is because sometimes you'll get emails like, I can't figure out the word on line 3. And you're like, and which document, which page are you talking about? And so we want to kind of focus that so that everyone's talking about the same thing.
Right.
The other thing we recommend is that you include your contact information. We have a footer that goes on every page of your project. This is an example from the Los Angeles County Library, and they link to their Facebook and their Twitter and their Instagram, and that questions contact us is a mail to form. And it just, you're just making it as easy as possible for people to find you, because while we want people to ask questions online in those notes sections, not everyone is willing to look stupid in public, to ask questions that they feel self-conscious about in public. And sometimes those questions have nothing to do with the page or the transcription. It's like, oh, I have another one of these diaries you've been working on. Would you like a copy? That's actually happened to us quite a bit.
Yes. Yes.
So the last thing that we recommend is that you send a newsletter. It doesn't have to be complicated or big, and doing something as often as you can. We would recommend once a month, but if you only get to it once a quarter, that's okay too. A lot of it's about how fast of a pace are you trying to set for your project. You can pull in a list of all your collaborator emails from your project owner view and from the page. You can just paste them into an email client as BCC, or if you use, MailChimp or Constant Contact, you can do it there. And we have a blog post that kind of explains and shows a lot of different examples of what people will do for crowdsourcing project newsletters. So you can highlight cool things you found in the transcriptions. You can highlight volunteers who've hit milestones. So-and-so did 100 pages. There's lots of different things that you can do to kind of find content for that. But the key thing is a little bit of a rah, this is a going successful project. Don't you want to come back and do and do more with it? So, we at FromThePage really love what we do, and we love the projects that are run on FromThePage. But we also recognize that the entire historical community benefits from that increased public awareness and appreciation for what archives and special collections and libraries do. So crowdsourcing invites citizens to join in that work, to give them a sense of responsibility for the past and a direct personal connection to the people who made it. So that's all the kind of formal presentation we have for you today. But if you're even the littlest bit inspired, I'd encourage you to act on that. We do quick start calls where you can bring 200 pages, PDFs, images, and we'll work with you to get your project configured and launched. Really, no strings attached. Our 200-page trial, you get to run it for as long as you want, with up to 200 pages. It lets you kind of poke around and play, but also volunteers will start discovering your material and will start transcribing it, and that's magic. So we'll send out a link to the resources we mentioned and a recording tomorrow or Monday.
Yeah, so as Sarah mentioned, we that is the formal presentation. We kind of like to open things up for discussion and QA, and then if there's time and people would like to see how FromThePage itself works, then we have time for that too. So we have such a small
Thank you, Sagan.
Yes.
Sagan actually started a trial, had people volunteer and work on it because it was really cool. It's the Linus Pauling papers. And then it was like, okay, fine, I'll talk to you. So.
Yes. Yeah, and the thing is, we have so few people here. This is such a small crowd.
Yeah.
Feel free to either type up a question in the chat or just go ahead and unmute yourself and holler at us.
Yeah.
Yes, Alex.
Hi, yes, it's Alex. Nice to see you all. I'm willing to do volunteer work because I'm a very helpful person, But if I may ask, is it okay if I try to volunteer and then if I don't feel comfortable with the work, could I be excused from volunteering?
Sure.
That's
Just,
absolutely,
yeah.
that is up to any projects, the people running projects, but the nature of a volunteer activity is you can walk away.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Just wondering.
Yeah.
Hi all, I don't have my camera on today. It's Danielle with LA County. I didn't do my hair, so it just is what it is. This is recorded, so that's fun. Whatchamacallit, I wanted to share that having the contact information is helpful. We do get emails from our volunteers, so we are able to respond to them. So it's been really good for that. But I did have a question about the comments. Do we get alerts when the volunteers add a comment? Because I don't know that I've received any comment alerts.
Do you get the overnight email, like something that comes in?
Yes.
Okay, it should be, any comments should be in there. And if you're noticing a discrepancy, forward us that email and tell us, but.
Yeah, you should be able to see everything. You should not have to go kind of troll through the site looking for comments. It definitely should arrive in your mailbox every morning.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful. I'll double check. Maybe I've been missing it when I check that email. Okay, thanks.
Hey, it's Brian with Charleston. I didn't do my hair this morning either, but I don't think it matters.
But you did your mustache.
Yeah, that's right. So, and pardon me for my ignorance because I haven't done crowdsourcing ever before, and I have dabbled in like social media and those issues. We only have 2 full-time staff members here, so my biggest question is, that's awesome. If I were to say have 100 people volunteer for whatever transcription project, what do we do for best practices for quality control? I mean, if I can't, the whole point I brought up social media is the 2 of us can't provide enough content for social media for us to have an account here. I can't imagine what it'd be for me to have to actually respond to, a number of people who are volunteering to transcribe, disparate projects that I might present to them.
I would probably run like single projects at a time, just because it kind of helps you keep focused. You may get 100 people that come by and kick the tires, and you'll end up with 3 who give you 4 hours a day. That's the truth of crowdsourcing, is it's not 100 people that you're actually interacting with on a regular basis. It's 2 or 3, or if you're really lucky, 5 or 10. That's kind of on the outside, right? So you get to know their work, and they get to know you. For quality control, we have some very specific features built into the software that kind of give you some options.
Right, you have options for how you want to run a project, and quality control is a balancing act, labor versus quality, and a lot.
And your labor often versus quality, right?
A lot depends on the goals of the project, right? So if you compare sort of the colonial court records example, that was a case in which the North Carolina State Archives is trying to make their material full text searchable. And to some large extent, anything is better than nothing, because these court records are 300 years old, and you can't do a control F and find what you're looking for there. So their quality needs, I'd say, are fairly low. But if you compare that with, say, the Maryland State Archives at the same time was running a project working on vital records of living people, so marriage certificates from the late 1970s up through the 1980s. These are things that people need to authorize hospital treatment for their spouse, things like that. They, by contrast, had a staff member check every single record, right?
They had multiple staff members doing this because it was not a small task.
Right. So there was a lot of labor that went into that because the need was high, right? So there really is a balancing act. In our software, there are 3 different ways that you can configure your project. You can configure a project in which review is optional. So if somebody transcribes a page and they're happy with it, great, you're done, they're done. Anybody else can edit it if they spot problems, but that's considered good enough. they can ask for review. They can say, flag this page for review, and then it will show up in the list of pages needing review for anyone to review and correct and say, yeah, okay, this looks fine now. That is the mode that is potentially lowest quality, but it's also lowest labor, right? Review is this way of saying, hey, I need help here, right? Look over my shoulder, please.
And hopefully they're also leaving notes or questions that also can point you to problems.
Right. The next two levels up are ones in which every page needs to be reviewed. So as soon as someone is done transcribing a page, it's marked as needing review. And there's two different options for how review is done. One is one in which review is open. Anybody who can transcribe the project can also review pages. The other was one in which review is restricted. So you decide who is allowed, who is authorized to be a reviewer. That could be people who are on your staff. It could be a handful of trusted expert volunteers as well. Only those
promoting volunteers to be reviewers is a nice trick.
Yes, as Sarah will often point out, transcribing is fun. Reviewing is a lot less fun.
More work, right?
Yeah, it is. Like, there are people who are willing to put that effort in because they're really committed to quality, or they are persnickety enough that they like fixing typos, but really most people prefer to transcribe from scratch.
Although we have seen super successful review done when Archives of Michigan did a project, and they were working with the Daughters of the American Revolution, multiple chapters around the state, and the volunteers were all logging their time and competing for volunteer hours. And they post a set of, these were World War I service cards again. They post a set in the morning. People would jump in and transcribe them, and the archivist would be digitizing another set while this was happening. And she'd post another set after lunch, but in the meantime, everything was done and they still wanted volunteer hours. So they were more than happy to review because that was kind of still under the umbrella of the project and the volunteer hours. So, there's different ways to do it. So we also have a review dashboard, and we do a couple of things. We try to show you people who are new to the project. So if they have never been reviewed, if a page has never been approved from a particular transcriber, they'll show up in a list so you can prioritize looking at that work.
Yeah, because early intervention oftentimes helps.
Right, kids, some coaching, some, or things like that. We also show you people who are kind of drive-by transcribers, people who come in and do a single page
And leave.
and then leave.
And they may not be able to be reasoned with. You may just have to fix it on your own. That tends to be very low quality work. But again, the goal is to focus your efforts on the things that need work, as opposed to just giving them a scatter shot.
Right. Lisa asks, do we advise giving out information about qualifications for volunteers? Your volunteers will self-select. If they're terrible at cursive, they'll show up, do a page or two, and you'll never see them again. If they're, really motivated and interested, they will get better. And a lot of times what we see is people come in and do a couple pages, and then they go back and they review and edit their first pages because they have figured so much more out.
Oh, that was a W. Suddenly that word makes sense. So they'll go back 5 pages and edit their first transcript.
Now, we do have a way you can block problematic volunteers. We don't see it used a lot. We really hate it that we had to create it, but there is that option if you really need it.
And in terms of qualifications, you're casting as wide a net as possible. It does help if you're looking for things that are specific skills. Like, I need someone who's familiar with ornithology to work on these naturalist field books. Or, hey, these documents are all in French, and I would really need help with somebody who can speak some French here. That can be helpful. But that's, I don't think you need to solicit CVs from people. Yeah. Other questions?
I think we may share our screen and show you around from the page then.
And we don't have anything specific prepared, so I have to bear with me as I find a handful of examples. But
and if questions come up, please feel free to
Yes.
interrupt, either unmute yourself or in the chat.
So we can just take a look at a handful of things that have been transcribed recently, and probably we should dive into some of the other options. Susan has a question. Yes, Susan?
While you're getting your stuff ready, did I recall from a prior From the Page presentation that you were looking into AI transcribing?
Yeah, we
And
will.
how is that working?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, why don't we jump straight into there?
Because you don't want to, like, I don't know, the AI stuff is a lot more controversial and can be challenging
okay.
and weird. So we will come back,
We'll
come back to
it.
that.
Promise we will. Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So let's talk about a handful of documents here. Actually, let me find a better example than this. I just realized not quite what we're after. So how do we jump in here? There we go. Okay, Neal family papers. Let's take a look maybe at the next page. So this is the volunteer experience, the transcription interface. We have the opportunity to see what's on one side of the screen and then to transcribe it. I'm not going to transcribe the entire page, but we're going to get started.
Received, already received. A letter from sister.
So I'm going to hit save on this, but I'm not going to hit done because the transcription is not complete. And I actually suspect, this isn't Sister Millie, this is Sister Mitty. You can see that she's crossed her T's, but over without actually intersecting them. So I'm going to change that to Mitty. Saturday I misspelled. Any other mistakes?
Yeah,
made?
the last line was glad
Yes, that
was
a typo.
from you.
Oh wow, that's pretty terrible. Okay, all right. Okay, but one of the things that we want to do here is show that every time you transcribe a page, we save the versions. So you can see that this was originally uploaded by University of North Carolina Libraries. It was blank. That was 2 weeks ago. Then this morning, we just transcribed this page. You can see my additions here. And then we made edits and we fixed these errors, right? So you can see everything that has been done in this. You have this full audit history that is visible to people running the project. It's also visible to all the volunteers. So everyone can see the work everyone else has done and hopefully learn and improve from that.
Right, we were
together.
when we created From the Page, we're very inspired by Wikipedia's model of collaborative knowledge creation. So, that's one of the many pieces. Some of the other ones are the questions box at the bottom.
And I'm actually going to leave a note here. So again, saving that means that the people running this project at UNC Libraries are going to be able to see that. And in fact, anyone else can see this as well. So if I take a look at the recent notes on the project, we can see this conversation. We can see what I just did, and then a handful of other comments by other people. So we can come in and see, all right, here's a case of somebody who runs the project who's saying, all right, well, I've reviewed this, but you
I think that's a volunteer action.
oh really?
Yeah.
Okay. But here's somebody saying, you didn't do the best job here. So please be more careful in the future. Yeah, so we can see
Yeah, she made a lot of changes.
Right. But what you want is a community that monitors everyone else and kind of helps each other out and corrects each other's work. And that is one of the
In a
things that we
pleasant
see
way.
here.
Yeah.
In a pleasant way is
It's
one of the
pretty
things
pleasant,
we,
yeah. It's hard to make
focus
that
on.
happen, but
Yes.
most of our volunteers are very nice to each other.
yes.
So in addition to full text transcription, we had some examples in the presentation about what we call field-based transcriptions, things like service cards or marriage certificates. And we have two different types. We have one type that is kind of a single entry per page, so a service card or maybe a birth certificate. And then we have a type that
This is an interesting example.
oh, that's a well. I
Yeah,
don't
it's
like
not
that
a great example.
Yeah,
Okay,
go
let's
find
one of the ones from Missouri, for example.
yeah.
They run a number of interesting projects.
That's going to be a spreadsheet version.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All
Well,
right.
okay. We have we have things like cards, and then we have things that look more like spreadsheets, right?
Right.
Ledgers, tax rolls, registrations, registers, things like that. And this is one that kind of shows both of those things. You can set up fields for county and year, and these fields are things that you configure.
And then you can set up a spreadsheet for the actual data, these entries here. So you can see Austin, Isaiah, and they are, in this case, asking volunteers to do a little bit of expansion and interpretation, right? So Austin, Isaiah, the second entry is actually the word same, right? And they've instructed their volunteers, repeat the name if you see it.
And this, this is interesting because we see some projects that use this approach to do things like index names mentioned in newspapers.
Yes.
So, write down every name that shows up on this page in this newspaper and then tell us a little bit about them. And that's very interpretive. It's a very kind of interpretive task to ask your crowd to do. But what you get out the other side is really interesting data sets as well as
Yes.
finding aids. So it's cool.
Yeah, should we dive
Yes,
into
now you can
now
show
dive into the
people
AI,
the AI stuff.
All right. So it might be here. Yeah, we were just working on this, I think, day before yesterday. Okay, so this is the way that we have been trying to integrate AI into FromThePage, right? We have a handful of principles we want to follow. The first and most important one being that humans are always in control. We want people to be in the driver's seat. So if I take a look, actually, let me skip to the next page. If I take a look at this page, and I'm just going to go full screen here. The first way that we're using AI for some projects is as an assistant to help people read. So if I'm diving into this and saying, okay, well, what's going on here? I'm not sure. I can ask for the AI assist button, and toggling that on lets me see what an AI service believes this page is, right? Believes these words are.
So it's like having someone look over your shoulder and give you a second opinion. It may not be right, but it may be right when you're wrong, and you may be right when it's wrong.
Right. For example, I kind of doubt that this randomly sprang into French, and but
this is we use a service called Transcribus for this, and they're out of the EU, out of Austria, and they have a number of European models as well. So sometimes we do see a bias in that direction.
Yes. So the other way that we are letting people interact with AI is to provide a first draft transcription. Now, the thing about the first draft of a transcription is that we are very concerned that people will trust the AI a little bit too much. So we like to take the transcription and pass it to another AI service to try to flag potential errors. So any potential errors, we try to flag and replace with these placeholders. And in this case, we're using puzzle face emojis as placeholders. So that requires people to replace those and actually look at the image. It's not perfect. We are doing a lot of experimentation right now. And one of the things that we are finding is that in some cases, people tend to trust the words that aren't flagged at all. So that's a challenge that we have to work on.
Yeah, people really love the AI assist, the overlay on the document, even our experienced transcribers, genealogists who've been reading handwriting for 20 years, or probably all of their life. And they will use this when they encounter something they can't decipher, and not the rest of the time, versus like an undergraduate leans on it a lot more because they're less familiar with cursive, less familiar with historical penmanship. The AI draft, especially with the replacement placeholders, that's a lot more controversial. People we're not even sure it's the right thing to do. But we want to experiment with this and understand what actually helps humans, what gets the highest quality result, and like makes it fun, right? Because this is volunteer labor. You can't. They're not going to do work if it's not fun.
Yeah. Any questions on kind of AI and our approach to it, those sorts of things? I forget who we have.
Let's see, we have one new message. I do have to say that our AI offerings are an additional 20 cents a page because that's what we pay transcriptists to get their results back. We're just showing off our cursive reading skills.
Yeah, some pages are easier than others.
If there's no other kind of questions, which we're happy to take, we should show maybe import and export.
Yeah, that's a great point.
So we spend a lot of time trying to make sure it's as easy as possible to get material into FromThePage and then to get transcriptions out from the page. So when you start a project, you get this add work screen and you can upload PDFs with images in them. You can upload zip files,
folders of images.
Each folder is a work. Each work has a lot of images in it.
And then there are a handful of digital library systems that we integrate with more directly: Internet Archive, Content DM, and any kind of system that supports the IIIF standard. This is great because you don't have to upload anything. You just paste a URL in to say, the compound object on your Content DM site or a IIIF manifest. And we're able to pull in all of the metadata, all of the page structure, and then reference the images that are high resolution images that you already have on your digital library system. So it's really efficient. It's really high. It's really nice for volunteers to have all that really high res stuff. In terms of getting data out of the system, we have a handful of export formats, and let me pull up just an example of, we'll find a nice short document. This is only 12 pages, so that's a good example. So you can see, if we're reading this, this is a farm diary. It mentions tobacco, weather, slavery, other kinds of schooling and things like that. If we want to pull that out, we can pull that out in a number of different export formats. For project owners, we can pull that out as plain text or HTML or TEI. We can pull out a IIIF manifest that includes this, the transcript as annotations. And then if we want to do a bulk export, we have a lot of different export formats, including some researcher-friendly ones like PDFs or Microsoft Word documents. Any of the spreadsheet or field-based or structured data exports can be exported as comma-separated values. So you can pull a spreadsheet out that has, a row for every data item, essentially. And then there's a handful of other kind of fun things that can be enabled and made visible to researchers. So if you enable user downloads, then users can pull down PDFs themselves or Microsoft Word documents themselves. They can even do some fun digital humanities analysis by sending the document off to tools like Voyant or Word Trees. Let's see. Voyant is not, we don't actually run Voyant, so we're never quite sure what's going to happen there. With Word Trees, we can say, okay, well, here's, all the mentions of 1855 and August and the context around it. So that's kind of fun things that people can do for experimentation. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. We are very close to time. Are there any quick other questions or comments from anyone? No, then thanks
Thank
everyone
you.
for coming. Yeah,
Yeah.
we really appreciate it. And always feel free to drop us a line at support@fromthepage.com. We'll go to both of us.